bad people sin. When a person does something morally, legally wrong, they know that there are consequences, but they don't think about those consequences. They're not focusing on them, and they take the immediate gratification, the immediate benefit that they feel they will get from the sin, and overlook the fact that the consequences will be negative. So Reb Shimon is a person who feared sin, which means he was a person who looked into the future and he realized the consequences of the sin. That's the simple understanding over here. But it doesn't say one who knows or understands the future. It's someone who sees the future. Why seeing? Why not just understanding? In fact, it's based on a biblical verse. King Solomon says, "Hachacham einov berosho." A wise person has his eyes in his head. Now, most people, I think, have their eyes in their heads. So why is it you have to be wise to have that anatomical reality? And the answer is that he doesn't mean literally that a wise person has his eyes in his head. It means a wise person looks ahead, sees things the way they are ahead into the future. That's probably the basis for Rabbi Shimon's statement, one who sees the future, who sees the consequences. But why seeing? Why? Now the question is now transferred to the verse itself. Why the focus on seeing? Why not just someone who understands the consequences? And the Rebbe explains, and he says that understanding is not enough. There are two problems with understanding. As much emphasis that we like to place on knowledge and understanding, there are two shortcomings. Number one, even if you understand something is right or something is wrong, it will not necessarily affect your behavior. People know, the image that I once got that is a perfect analogy of this, years back when there was a lot more smoking in public, you would see nurses walking out of Roswell Park, the Cancer Institute, and smoking while even looking at the sign that's saying how dangerous smoking is. So they had knowledge, and their knowledge was as good as anyone else's. They had the knowledge, but they didn't see into the future. They weren't looking. They just had the knowledge. The knowledge alone doesn't guarantee that you're going to be affected, that you will change your behavior, because behavior is very much a part of your being. It's something that you can't change ordinarily just because you have knowledge. That's number one. Number two, knowledge is tricky. Logic could be argued. We have people who could argue both sides of an issue. Good lawyers could do that. That's their job. If the lawyer is a defense lawyer and he's a prosecutor, not at the same time, not in the same case. There's an expression of the Talmud that a prosecutor can't be a defender. But you can unless you're in the Soviet Union or in China, they're the same lawyer as the defense lawyer and the prosecutor.
And the judge.
And the judge sometimes as well. But normally you have to be one or the other. You can't be both. But you could be someone who in one case argues for the defense, and in a similar case, you became the district attorney, you will argue for their prosecution. Because logic can go both ways. You can keep on arguing back and forth. So just because you understand the consequences of the future doesn't guarantee that you're going to live in accordance with that understanding. But when you see it, when it's something that is visual doesn't just mean seeing with your eyes. Visual could mean seeing with such perception that it's such a certainty. Seeing is believing. When you see something, the Talmud says that there's a law that if you saw the commission of a crime, you can't be the judge in that crime. You can't be the one to judge the criminal. Why? Because since you saw it with your own eyes, there's no way you're going to see the person's innocence. Now, the same judge will hear testimony, convincing testimony from witnesses and other corroborating evidence, but he could still be objective. He could still rule against or for the person contrary to the evidence that he hears. Because when you hear something, there could always be questions and doubts about it. You can hear the other side, and the other side could turn you around to accepting the other position. But when you see it with your own eyes, the degree to which you're convinced is so great that it's unlikely that you're going to change, that you're going to see the other side. Although nowadays with AI, you can't trust anything anymore, not even your eyes, because you don't know what's real and what's not real. But in the olden days, when vision was something, was proof of something that happened, when you saw it with your own eyes, that will be the closest way of guaranteeing that you're not going to sin, because you see the consequences. It's so vivid that you can't deny it. You can't in any way rationalize how what you're doing is right. I just want to comment that Rabbi Shimon is the one who says this, the one who sees into the future. The word Shimon, the name Shimon, comes from the word Shema, hear, listen. So it's a little bit strange that he's the man who represents hearing is focusing on vision. But the truth is that, and this is I think a very characteristic of great people, especially people who are imbued with the holiness, could always see the other side of a issue. They could always see the other attitudes that are not their specialty. Shimon focuses on hearing and understanding, but then he recognizes, you know what? Sometimes you have to go to the other function of vision, of sight. And that you'll see this throughout Ethics of the Fathers, that rabbis who stand for one position will argue an opposite position. Someone who focuses on Torah study, we'll have it a little bit later, this Rabbi Shimon who focuses on Torah study, which is something you get through hearing, through listening, talks about the importance of prayer, which is not his forte. His forte is learning. But that's the difference between someone whose focus is on their own interests and someone whose focus is on what is God's interest. Our own interests, you can be completely devoted to one approach, to one direction, and you ignore the other directions. But when you're doing things because this is God's teaching, you want to incorporate both approaches, even though it's not your approach. Also, we find the Shema. What does Shema mean? Here. Yeah, if you look in the Sefer Torah, on the Torah scroll, the word Shema ends with the letter Ayin, and there's a king-size Ayin. And what does the word Ayin mean? Eye, vision.
Ayin, Einayim,
Einayim, eye is vision. So in the word that means here, you also have a hint to the idea of vision. Another thing, the word Shema is said to be an acronym for 3 words, for a verse that says, Su'u Marom Einechem, lift your eyes heavenward. And the verse continues, and see who created all this. So the Shema, which focuses on hearing, has a reference, a hint to vision. Because in Judaism, there's no such thing as someone who could say, this is my forte, this is my specialty, and I'm going to concentrate only on this. The Talmud has an expression, a person who says, I only have Torah, I don't need anything else, I just study Torah, doesn't even have Torah. If you have Torah but without kindness, without other means of expressing your devotion to God, you're only serving your own interests, and that's not considered a valid way of serving God. So the first understanding of this statement, a person who is the right approach is to see into the future, means to look at the consequences of your actions. Always measure, if I do A, what are the consequences? That's interpretation number one. Interpretation number two, the Talmud tells us that whenever we do a mitzvah, we create an angel. We actually create a spiritual being called an angel. And those angels support us, and they protect us, and they speak up for us in our defense. So when a person comes before the heavenly court after living a long life of 180 years, and you stand before the heavenly tribunal, and you're on trial, and the prosecution and the defense each brings witnesses to your behavior. So the defense brings all those angels that you created through your mitzvahs are summoned to the heavenly court to testify on your behalf. And likewise, if God forbid a person has negative behavior, you create negative prosecuting angels. So that's what it means. What is the right approach? A person who literally sees that which is created. You see the effects of your behavior. Your behavior creates energy. You're not just doing something right or wrong, which is certainly what it means, but beyond that, you're actually creating positive or negative energy. What is an angel? An angel is a spiritual force. And we have the power to create those angels. We have the power to create positive spiritual forces, or, God forbid, negative forces. So that was Reb Shimon's lesson, that a person should always recognize the consequences of his actions, not just how destructive the actions could be in the future, but right now you're creating something positive or something, God forbid, negative. A third interpretation of Reb Shimon's teachings of someone who sees that which is born, who sees that which is created. When a person goes around living his life and reacting to what we consider to be reality, the truth of the matter is that we're not looking at reality in the truest sense of the word. Because the reality, if you ask a physicist, what is a table? He's going to tell you the table, there's no matter there, it's all energy. Well, the Torah knew this before physics developed this understanding, that everything is made up of atoms and subatomic, and ultimately nothing occupies any space, it's all energy. But the energy is divine energy. How did the world come about? God's declaring, let there be light, let there be a firmament, let there be vegetation. So what is the essence of everything? This table doesn't exist on its own. This table's existence is the divine energy that's in this table that keeps the table in existence. Some people will say the table is a dead object, it doesn't have any life. The great Kabbalist, the Arizal, said that's not true. Everything has life, and if you ask a physicist, there's a tremendous amount of activity going on in this table. We can't see it, but we know that's the reality. Well, the physicist doesn't realize that it's not even what he sees or understands. There's a deeper reality, which is the divine words with which God created the universe. So a person what is the right approach to a person? A person should recognize what reality is. That reality is not what you see, it's what is the divine force that's involved in creation. And that an extension of that understanding is that the world is not an independent thing. The world doesn't have its own existence. The world's existence is the divine energy that's in it. and the divine energy is in there every second. If for 1 second God would say, I'm not interested in creating the world would just disappear. There would be no existence. There would be nothing. Because existence is defined by God's creative power, because that's what existence is. Existence is a manifestation of God's creative power. So what's the right approach that a person should follow? A person should recognize that reality is the divine energy in everything. Now, why is that such a good thing to remember? It's maybe a very profound theological belief, but what's the practical application of that? The practical application of that is that you can't look at life in any way as being in conflict with God, with God's will. Because the very existence of society, the very existence of the universe is God. It has no independent existence. So how could there be a possible conflict? So when you see conflict, that's God's way of challenging us to recognize that the conflict is only in our mind. The conflict doesn't really exist. Just to give you an example, if a person says, the Torah tells me that I have to be honest in my business dealings, but the only way I can make a living is by cheating. I heard this from a businessman. A businessman was telling me the only way I can make money as a salesman is by misrepresenting the value of the object, of the thing I'm selling, and essentially defrauding the customer. I can't make a living otherwise because I tried and this is the only way I can make a living. Well, that person is not in touch with reality, because the existence of the world is God's power, and Torah is God's teaching to the world. How could the world, which is essentially God's energy, be in conflict with God's own will? There's no way that reality could be in conflict with the Torah, because that's God's wisdom, and the world itself is a manifestation of God. The only reason we think there's conflict in this world is because we're not aware, we don't see the divine energy that's invested in everything in this world.
And this capitalizes on why would bad things happen to good people?
You could connect it, yes. That in truth there's nothing truly bad in this world. Everything that's bad is a concealment of the divine. And the reason why there's concealment is for us to get rid of the concealment. In other words, if God is in everything and the reality of everything is the divine, how come we don't see it that way? And the answer is, the reason why there's concealment is precisely because God wants us to remove the concealment, to reveal the fact that God is in everything. So whenever you see darkness, it's not there to say, well, it's dark, I'm frightened. It's there to say, God wants me to turn on the lights. Sometimes literally, and sometimes, and most often, figuratively. That's a third interpretation. So remember, the first interpretation is you see the future, you see the consequences of your behavior. That something that is appealing and enticing to you right now, later on you'll regret it because the consequences are not good. So a person who sees consequences will be someone who fears sin. The second explanation was that you should know that you create energy, you create angels every time you do a mitzvah, and every time you do the opposite, you create positive or negative energies. Number three, someone who sees the divine creative power within the universe. When you see that, that will protect you from sin, and that will make sure that you will see everything in different terms. When we're looking at what's going on in the world and we become depressed, it's only natural. We're human. When we see negative things happening in the world, the anti-Semitism and all the other things that are going on, instead of becoming depressed by it, it's God's way of saying to us, I made it dark because I want you to turn on the lights. And that's the challenge to us. Instead of fretting over it and saying, oh, this is terrible, the world is coming to an end, New York City is going to be doomed. Those are all very logical arguments. But that's not the way Rabbi Shimon would tell us to look at it. Rabbi Shimon tells us to look at it as it's a challenge for us to turn on the lights. Then there's a fourth way of understanding Rabbi Shimon's teaching of seeing that which is born, seeing the future. Sometimes we behave in a certain way, but when we realize that in the future we're going to be different, we change in the present. This is what Rabbi Shimon is saying. In the end, you're going to come around to recognizing truth. In the end, you'll come to realize what's reality. In the end, you'll behave in a different way. So why postpone it for later when you can do it right now? In other words, when you see into the future, what is the future? The future we're guaranteed is going to be positive. We are guaranteed that the future is going to be a world, a godly world, a perfect world, a utopian world, a world of Mashiach, a world of redemption. And we know that that's going to happen, and we know it's long overdue, so it has to happen imminently. If you're a rational person, you believe Mashiach is coming right now. If you're an irrational person, you'll say he's not going to come right away. And that's what Rabbi Shimon is telling us. Focus on reality, not the reality that we were brought up with, not the reality that you read in the newspapers or listen to the news. That's not reality. That's a cover-up of the reality. Look into the future, see how things are going to turn out. And it's the most logical thing to believe that Mashiach will come. It's not a matter of faith. Yes, faith is very important, but belief in Mashiach is the most logical thing that you could think of. There's nothing more logical. It's more logical that if I drop this, it's going to fall because of gravity. That's not logical. I don't understand gravity. I don't think the scientists understand gravity. But that Mashiach is going to come is something that's the most logical conclusion. Why? Because if you believe, as is most logical, that there's a creator to this world and nothing happens on its own, and the creator knows what he's doing, he certainly has a plan and a purpose that the world will become the world that he intends it to be. The world is not going to remain a jungle. It's not going to remain a place of anarchy and evil and darkness. If so, and it's long overdue, it makes so much sense that this is going to happen, and it's going to happen imminently. Sometimes we're irrational, so we have doubts because we're not rational. But if you're rational, you believe it's going to happen. And if you believe it's going to happen, and you know it's going to change the way we behave, we're all going to behave differently. So that person doesn't wait for it to happen. He starts to live that way right now. The Rebbe very strongly emphasized that it's important to learn Torah in general, because Torah refines the way we think and gives us a much more positive way of thinking. But in addition to that, there's a specific focus to study the parts of Torah that deal with redemption, or deal with the Messianic age, that deal with Mashiach. Why? Because the Torah has the capacity to change our way of thinking, and so if you read about the future and you study those teachings of the Torah about the future, it'll make your mind futuristic. Your mind will think in a future manner. So that's what Rabbi Shimon means. Roa es hanola, you should see the future. Try to see and visualize and capture the future into the present. I mentioned that the other three rabbis correspond to three of the four species. The eyes are the myrtle leaves. The lulav corresponds to the chaver, the good friend, because the lulav leaves are all bound together. The good neighbor are the willows, because they grow in clusters like neighbors. So what about this one, Rabbi Shimon's teaching? Rabbi Shimon's teaching relates to the sukkah. The word sukkah, what does the word sukkah mean? The word sukkah has many meanings. One meaning, of course, is the schach, the covering. It's to live in a hut that has a covering, a roof. But also the word sukkah is related to a name that's mentioned in the Torah. We just read it recently. The first Jewish woman, what was her name? What was her original name? No, her original name. No one. Leah. What? Miss. Her original name was Yiska. Yiska.
Sarai's original name was Yiska?
Right, her original name was Yiska, then it became Sarai, then it became Sarah. It reminds me of a joke. There was this guy who comes to the judge with a broken Yiddish accent, and he says he wants to change his name. What's your name now? My name now is Johnson. And what do you want to change it to? McDonald. Says, why do you want to change your name? Because I don't want anyone to know that I'm Jewish. But if your name was Johnson, how would anyone know? He says, yeah, that's the name I changed. I used to be a Jewish name. I changed it to Johnson. But then people will ask me, what was your name before you changed it? I want them to know that it was also a non-Jewish sounding name. I killed the joke, but that's the
No, that was good.
it was good, okay. I'm getting some support.
It's a nifter joke.
So Sarai's original name was Yiska. What does the word Yiska mean? So Rashi quotes the Midrash. It says she was able to see with her divine inspiration, with her prophecy. Sarah was a great prophet, and the greater than even Abraham. She saw into the future. So the sukkah, the word sukkah has the same root as the word yiska. The idea of the sukkah is to be able to see into the future. So far we have 3 out of the 4 species, and we have the sukkah as well. We're left with one more species. What's the 4th one that we left out? The Etrog. We'll soon get to the Etrog. Rabbi Elazar, the final sage, the 5th sage, Rabbi Elazar ben Etrog says, a good heart. That's the approach that he says that he advocated, a good heart. And his teacher, Rabbi Yochanan, said to his 5 students, I prefer the words of Rabbi Elazar ben Etrog, that it's a good heart. For in his words, your words are included. What he's saying is that if you have a good heart, then you have all the other things, a good eye, a good neighbor, a good friend, and you can see into the future. What does he mean by that? So before I go into it a little more deeply, the good heart corresponds to the Etrog. As the Midrash says, that the Etrog resembles the heart. So we have all 5 elements of the holiday of Sukkot here. The 4 plants and the sukkah correspond to these 5 students. What is the meaning of a good heart? A good heart is greater than someone with a good eye. A good eye is someone who sees the positive in everything, who sees the positive in everyone. And that's a tremendous quality. But the good heart is someone who doesn't just see it, but lives the positive. Someone whose emotions are always ignited with love and passion for others, for God, obviously, and for other people. Because even if a person could see the positive in things, doesn't necessarily guarantee that they're going to act in a positive way. It's a very important means to that end. But seeing the good is not an end, that's a means to an end. Having a good friend is a great thing, it's a means to an end. The same thing with a good neighbor, and the same thing with someone who can see the consequences of their actions. They're all great and positive things, but relative to a good heart, they're all a means to an end. Now, it doesn't mean that they don't have intrinsic good in them. To have the good eye and a good friend is intrinsically good, but relative to a good heart, the good heart is the experience itself. We can talk about experiences, we can talk about a lot of things and focus on them, which is very positive, But when you have the good heart, you are experiencing those positive things. What about a person who doesn't have a good heart? So what do you do when you don't have a good heart? Not everyone is born with a good heart. It's not a natural trait. What?
Go to the doctor. Go to the doctor.
Go to the doctor, the cardiologist. So the answer is that the premise is wrong. The premise is wrong. The Talmud says that how could you recognize someone who is Jewish? He has three traits. He is Gomel Chesed, he's a person who does kindness, which is motivated by love, a good heart. Baishan, who's modest, and Rachaman, who's compassionate. And it spells the word Gever. Gever is Gomel Chasadim, Baishan, and Rachaman. Those are the three traits, and if someone doesn't exhibit those traits, there's some questions whether they're Jewish. The Talmud tells the story, a very tragic story, of King Saul's relatives were put to death because the Givonim, this was a tribe that deceived Joshua when they conquered the land of Israel, and posed as if they were from a foreign country, and they deceived them. So they converted to Judaism, but they were not highly regarded because they were not sincere. But what took the cake, the straw that broke the camel's back, was they demanded retribution. And I'm not going to go through the whole story, but they were wronged, and they were right about that, and they demanded retribution. And it showed they had no compassion. So King David said, if they don't show compassion, they're not really Jewish, and no one should marry into that group of people. So every Jew naturally has those three traits. But we know many Jews who are not kind. We know many Jews who are not compassionate. We know many Jews who are not modest. The answer is that God creates us with a potential, and we have that potential more than any other group. And if you look at history, the history bears us out on that. You see that throughout Jewish history, the Jewish people have been at the forefront of every effort to help other people. And that's why most ideologies that advance doing good for others are disproportionately controlled by Jews. Sometimes they have good intentions, sometimes their intentions are good, but their actions are bad. But even what we're contending with now, communism, which is now in the news because they elected a communist to be a mayor, communism was started by Jews and promoted by Jews, tragically, because it was the most evil ideologies in all of human history, but it was based on a misunderstanding of what kindness is. They wanted to help society, so they felt, let's make everyone equal, and it turned out they made everyone equally poor, equally suffering, except for the communist leaders. But Jews have been always at the forefront of every movement that advanced kindness and love. So every Jew has it inside of him or her, but it has to be brought out into the open. How do you do that? Through conditioning. And I told the story many times, I'll tell it again. The Alter Rebbe, the first Chabad Rebbe, was once sitting with a group of his colleagues, and it came to their attention that there was a Jewish family that were thrown into a dungeon because they didn't pay their rent. And they owed a lot of money, and the landowner just threw them into the dungeon, and their lives were in danger. So the rabbis decided, we're going to make a list of all the people that we know in this town, and we'll go to them door to door collecting money to ransom this family. And they made this list, and the Alter Rebbe said to them, but you left out the richest man in town. And they said, we're not going to go to him, he's the biggest miser. Everyone who knows that whenever anyone came to him for any help, he would take out a copper coin worth a few cents and give it to the people, and the people would just throw it back at him. And they stopped going to him because they knew that he's going to give them a 5-cent nickel, whatever the equivalent was in those days. So the Alter Rebbe says, if you don't go to him, then count me out. I'm not going. And they said, but why waste our time, precious time? He says, look, if you want me to help you, you have to go to that miser. So they go to the miser, they knock on the door, the man opens the door, he sees a group of rabbis, he's very honored, and he asks, what could I do for you? He says, we need to collect money, 1,000 rubles, to save this family, could you help? He says, sure, I'd be very happy to help. And he takes out that rusty copper coin and gives it to the Alter Rebbe. And the Alter Rebbe takes the coin and he thanks him profusely. You don't know what a mitzvah you just did. You're such a kind person. You're so wonderful. And the other rabbis are rolling their eyes. Why did he have to waste our time? And they walk away. And the man calls the Alter Rebbe, come back. I want to give you some more. And they kept on going back and forth until he gave the full amount. And the Alter Rebbe explained this man was a kind man at nature, but because he was never given the opportunity to exercise kindness, because they threw it back, the copper coin back right at his face, he never was able to express the kindness that he had inside of him. If he didn't have that kindness inside of him, no flattery would help. You could flatter a child who has zero intelligence and say you're another Einstein. It's not going to make him smarter. But if the child has potential, the flattery and the praise will help the child actualize that potential. So the good heart is something that, even if you're not born with it, you could develop it through conditioning. The Etrog is not referred to as an Etrog in the Torah. That's the Aramaic translation. The word Etrog is not the Hebrew word. The Hebrew word for an Etrog is, anyone know? Pri Eitz Hadar, a beautiful fruit. Hadar is beautiful. A good heart makes the person a beautiful person. A person has a beautiful, a great brain. You'll say the person is brilliant, but who do we call beautiful? Not physically, but morally beautiful. Someone who has a good heart. That evokes a certain sense of admiration for their beauty, their spiritual beauty. Another thing about the Etrog, in the book of Psalms, there's a phrase, Al tuvieni regel gaiva, don't lead me to the legs of ego, of arrogance. If you take the initials of those 4 words, it spells Etrog. The Etrog is beautiful, but it's beautiful because it symbolizes humility. A person with a good heart is someone who's not looking for praise. They don't do good. Everyone does good, and most people do good because they know that it's going to get a good reaction. That's not pure good. Pure good is when a person does it with a good heart. That person is not doing it for his own self-promotion, for his own self-aggrandizement. Another thing about the heart. In the Shema, we read, don't follow the dictates of your heart and your eyes. Don't be misled by your heart and your eyes. And the Talmud says that when a person sees things, it creates a desire. So it should have said first your eyes and then your heart. Why does it say your heart first and then your eyes? So the truth of the matter is, it's not the eyes that see that cause the heart to want something. It really works the other way around. If you have a good heart, then the things that you will see will be positive, and that will further inspire you. But if your heart is not in the right place, then the way you will see things. So that's why, even though Rabbi Elazar, the first Rabbi Elazar, was the one who said a good eye, but a good heart is more than a good eye, because the good heart leads to a good eye. One other thing about the Etrog. Oh, I didn't see what time it is. one other thing, there's 4 things in Judaism that are described as perfect, as whole. Emunah Shlema. We say that when we say the Ani Mamin, I believe, Be'emunah Shlema, with perfect faith. Not just about Mashiach and God, all the 13 principles of faith, it's prefaced with the words Ani Mamin, I believe, Be'emunah Shlema, with perfect faith, with whole faith. Then you have Teshuvah Shlema. We say in our prayers, God, bring us back to doing tshuva, to repenting Shlema, perfectly. It should not be imperfect. Then you have Refuah Shlema. We ask God for a complete healing. We don't want just a half-baked healing. We want Refuah Shlema, complete healing. And the last thing is Geula Shlema, redeem us, a perfect redemption. Not a half-baked redemption, but a perfect redemption. If you take those 4 words, Emunah, Teshuvah, Refuah, Geula, what does that spell? Etrog. Etrog is the model of perfection. Because when you have a perfect heart, a good heart, a perfect heart, then everything else becomes perfect. And that's the power that is vested in the good heart. And that's why Rabbi Yochanan said, I prefer the words of Rabbi Elazar ben Aruch, because when you have the good heart, you have everything. Any questions?
I just wanted to ask you, you mentioned species. I always thought that the lulav represented the spine.
Yes, it does. There's one midrash that says the lulav represents the spine.
Yeah.
But I was adding on another idea that it also corresponds to the good friend, because the nature of a chaver means bound together, and the lulav's leaves, the way they're described, they have to be bound together, as if there was a rope around them that binds them together. So it's another symbolism.
Yes, I have a question, please. I have a pen here now. Etrog is an acronym for Alter
Regel Gava.
Regel
Gava.
Gava with an aleph or an ayin?
Aleph. Gimel Aleph Vav Hey.
What about is there not a vav in the Etrog?
You could put a vav in there, but it doesn't have to be written with a vav. It's usually written.
Okay, beautiful. Alter Regel Gava. Right. Okay. Right, thank you. I really learned a lot today. Baruch Hashem.
Thank you.